Welcome to Technosocial, a podcast that explores technology, society, creativity, and philosophy, where we try to push our thinking closer and closer to the edge and bring some gifts from the other side. Please click on the subscribe button, leave a like on the video, and if you're interested in supporting what we do, consider donating to our Patreon. Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Technosocial. We're here with the great Ebert, singer, songwriter, and now a extremely interesting thinker. And I'm not gonna do any more delays. Alex, you were telling us about apoptosis and these last thoughts that you've been having around that topic. Care to enlighten us?
So in terms of membranics, or the idea of like the permeability of different enclaves of existence, so the individual, the tribe, whatever, what have you, the family, what determines permeability, permeation, and why does permeation calcify and concretize and create essentially war? And so I started thinking about the cell, just the cellular life level, and thinking about cancer. There's been so many equivalencies drawn between cancer and capitalism, or cancer and individualism, but they, in my experience, I haven't dove deeply enough perhaps, or they don't sufficiently sort of reify that assessment. And what I realized is, and what I've felt for a long time, and what we were talking about in the email, is that death is really involved as a key. And that avoidance of the void, avoidance of, whatever you want to call it, the real, or whatever you want to call it, actually creates this cancerous state. And then I was thinking about the cancerous cell, and I realized, oh my God, cancer cells are defined by their avoidance of apoptosis, of cell death. Literally, that's what defines them. I was like, oh my God, okay, so here's our evidence that avoidant states, which I'm just calling like avoidant states, avoiding the void. So avoidant states is just what I'm using for now. Avoidant states are defined by, number one, calcified membranes, and number two, self-replication. A fear, which in societal terms translates into a fear of death, or an avoidance of. It doesn't necessarily, death is not the full word. It's an avoidance of what I'm going to hippishly call oneness, or the real, or the totality, whatever you want to call it. Avoidance of that. Now, why would we avoid that? Well, because it's formless, it's immortal. And I think that immortality is not so much a measure of time, but a measure of formlessness. And I think for that reason, because identity is so baked into form, we are avoiding sort of the oneness. And just briefly, just to put a cap in sort of my biggest aha last night, was that, by the way, is there echo in here, or am I just drunk?
You're just drunk, my man.
Okay. Okay, so oneness is not so much a unified field as a super dense amalgam of everything. So in other words, it's like total saturation of stuff, total saturation of form, which creates the sort of formlessness of it, the confusion, the fusion of confusion, which I am going to call super clarity, which is tantamount to wisdom. So it's this idea that I've always felt this way creatively, and you guys are really creative, so I'm curious, but the flow state, the I don't know state, the state of anti-knowledge is the wisdom state in a sense. So this anti-knowledge state, this super clarity, it's not clarity in terms of specifics or even epistemics. It's something else. It's a total apprehension, or sort of comprehension, or apprehending. And that state produces this flow state. You who knows, it's knowing pouring through you. It's the vesselhood. And I guess, it would make sense that just creatively, when we access that state for our sort of flow and bring that back, we end up with permeation. So I'm calling that sort of state, that immortal state. Oh, I wanted to mention something about it, that just the super clarity thing. So when we incorporate super clarity, those moments essentially become little of what Bard would call events, but what actually I would call distortions, because I'm a musician, and I think Owen, are you a musician, or one of you guys are musicians, right?
Yeah, we're both musicians to an extent.
Great. Okay. So have you ever had a song mastered? Like you have a song, you give it to someone, and then they master it, which means that they compress it to such an extent that they give like a little buffer before distortion, so that your song, even if it's distorted sounding, it won't distort the speakers. So they essentially compress, they limit, it's a limiter, but then they compress inside the limiter. So you have this delimiting area, which is sort of, zero. And then you have this compression that essentially takes the peaks and valleys, the dynamism, the pluralism of society. So to move the song over to, this is the societal parable, but it takes the dynamism of the song or the society and lifts in the case of society and music, it lifts the valleys, the divots, the silences. It lifts the valleys up to the peaks, so that you have what Vervaeke calls this salience mapping problem, where everything has salience because everything is loud, and it becomes homogeneous noise, right? It just becomes a field of noise. And well, I guess I'm mentioning that to move into another part, but yeah, there's a lot here. Let me finish that thought. So in terms of wanting to keep some sense of plurality in these, so Daniel, in your brilliant demented vision for the future, those are my words, not yours. You would probably still want to maintain or experiment with plurality, right? You would still want to experiment with event, not just process, right? You would still want to experiment with what I'm calling distortion, not just compression. So, and by the way, I actually think that compression, distortion, that is more, that speaks to me more than event process, I think, because really it also tells the story of Jesus, the church. No more Jesus, like that was enough. You know what I mean? It's about the event, but no, let's tamp it down. And anything else that tries to distort the system or distort reality gets compressed. And it can be incorporated as a tale that aids in the compression. So the tale of Jesus, like, it already happened. Don't worry. You don't have to be Jesus. He was Jesus for us. So all the events can stop happening. So what I'm interested in as an artist is the event, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. But to have the event, we need the valleys. We need the dynamism. Otherwise, it's all event. There's nothing happening. There's no actual distortion. We're being compressed to a single seeming event. And that's why you get these fuck you, you fucking fuck, postured pretendings of cool, or pretendings of individualism, or pretendings of like heroism, where it's like, oh, a mask? I'm not going to wear a mask. As if that is the Goliath. A mask is somehow the Goliath and that has made you David. Yes. We've diminished the scope of our capacity for event, for distortion, to such an extent that we feel satisfied with these micro heroisms that like really amount to simply consumerism.
Well, it's like that idea that capitalism recuperates anything cool that tries to break out of it, right? MTV just eats up grunge in a moment.
And that's the problem with, I'm not enough of a Deleuze like master, but that's the problem with nomadology to me, is that when you consider that in the context of a capitalist system, capitalism's just that's what capitalism needs. It needs the perception of the new in order for people to think that they have this agency to decide to adopt something that is, transgressive. But it's not. It's actually exactly the fuel that the capitalist system requires. So Yeah, it's disconcerting.
We've created such a massive egregore that is kind of chasing us down through history. And the depth of the problem is precisely because the only way out in the Deleuzian sense is to create, create, create. But I'm getting
Right.
ahead of myself. You mentioned death, the rapport with death. You said the word avoidance as like no void or a void. Beautiful. Why? Because the master morality of the artist or the hero or the righteous king who has authority, the ability to author reality, is precisely the not avoidance of the void, to actually go in there, step in there. Master morality means to face it, and then to tell everyone else how it's supposed to be. Jesus, the church. And so that dichotomy, that ability to protrude into the void, is that is the phallic moment of event and creation. Madness, I would equate it with some of Deleuze's ideas about the line of flight, because for the king, there is no barrier between individual, collective. There is no law for the king. The king does what the king wants. But for that, he needs to grasp and grapple that authority from precisely this one-on-one rapport with death itself, with the void.
You think so? I like that theory. Okay, so you think that power, like the apex of sort of human capability and capacity, must access that space. And I think, of course, you're right. However, it's interesting because when it gets filtered back into a control system, for instance, or into sort of a calcified membranics, where you're like, okay, now you are these people, you're this people, and I'm the king, and that's the way it will always be. It would seem that at that moment, the king loses the authority of the real, or the authority of the oneness, or not. I don't know. What do you think?
100%. As the king makes it his kingdom, and if he forgets the ability to go out and fish out that insight from God, let's say, then the kingdom will calcify. Then it's literally like Lord of the Rings in Gondor. It's like the king is kind of sleepy and dead, and he just doesn't care about going back and having a proper rapport with God. Then he has betrayed his people, and the kingdom rots.
Yeah.
And so he's not doing the service that he's meant to do.
Yeah.
The thing to look out for as well is also the tendency towards totalitarianism or fascism, where there's like the one king at the top who's like, I'm master morality and I kind of make the decisions based on what my drives are. And then everybody else forms the part of a totally calcified closed membranic machine that is just there to execute upon the vision or the will of the king. And I think that's totally the wrong route to go down. That is precisely where we went in the 20th century. That was the like Nazi misreading of Nietzsche, right?
Yeah. I agree. And I think we're kind of still going through that route now, insofar as that's what happens whenever kings don't have that rapport. And when you look at society today, the advances of techno-capitalism, its impact on the whole planet, you can totally see there's no king, he's dead, there's no God, he's dead. So we're kind of like falling slowly because that God juice, that ability to fecundate the earth is no longer present.
Right, exactly, because we end up controlled. And that brings me to this. I kept getting sort of rhetorically stupid I kept being like, oh my God, but unavoidable war. So we have the state of avoidance, and within the state of avoidance, we have the calcification of these membranes, and we have no permeation. And I think that state basically is war, even if it's like in hibernation. That state is sort of this state of unavoidable war, and that's where we start to drift into the argument for accelerationism, and which is a sort of a side branch of this. But what re-permeates membranes besides war and obliteration? We know that does. We know that total like sort of decimation is a permeation like key. But does anything else? So do we have to roll, like when we're designing, do you have to roll with this accelerationism? Or is there something else? Is there something as woo-woo as like, if you meditate, right? If you do ayahuasca, are there, for instance, like that psycho magic thing I sent around, Jodorowsky, just like imagine, like, burying people and putting glass over their head and throwing meat on them and having fucking, birds come eat meat off your like corpse and and then being naked and raw milk is being poured, like ridiculous made up rituals, can anything like that, can creativity, can a willful, intentional confrontation with oneness, with death, with the void, and oneness, with formlessness, with the formless immortal. I'm going to call it that, the formless immortal. And it's a little like, highbrow, but like the formless immortal. Can we confront that, reintegrate it, and create permeation, or is war required, or is or decimation, obliteration required? That's my big question right now.
Yeah, I have a view on that. Like to start, like to set the ground, I think this world is paradigmatically death, and death itself, like matter itself, is not the void from whence it came. It is not the unknown that gave birth to it, the Kether, the Ein Sof, that crowns existence from that void, right? We were speaking a while ago, and just to go a little bit on a tangent, Cadell, you said something like, the lack is at the core of the self. We are a lack, and all the shit that configures itself around that lack. Desire is precisely the movement towards filling that lack, finding shit to fill that, but never quite fixing it. So this world is kind of the same, right? We are made of matter. We want things. There's matter. There's songs and dances that we do with humans socially, but that is death in a way. But death as in it dies. It is just not death in the sense of the void, but death in the sense that it dies. And
which aspect dies?
Maybe death is not the right word that I wanted to say. Maybe I should say that this world is crystallized, right? Is not the void. It is that which avoids the void.
And you're saying that's the external world we're experiencing, or what's the part that's avoiding the void?
That would be the external world, like we experience, even the inside, even all the patterns that we inhabit in our head, and
they're all candidates to fill the void, right? Like we have the void, and then we look out, and everything is a candidate.
Yes, right. They're God candidates, but they never reach it. And so you have these practices which you mentioned, which are in fact death practices, and they kind of seek to take that which avoids entering the void and probe into it, right? But as we know, whichever line of flight the creative mind invents within capitalism is recuperated. So because the world is always crystallizing, right? It's what happens is like the dust settling on the earth.
Yeah.
So what can we do other than continue and like accept? I don't know. Do you have a view on that?
You know what? This brings up a really interesting thing. So what you're talking about in terms of, or the way I'm interpreting it, we have the void, I think Lacan calls it object or whatever. But we have this sort of, that's the thing we desire.
That's the thing we fantasize will fill the void.
Yeah. That's the thing we desire. But we have the lack. And we look, and everything is a candidate to fill the lack. And as you said, everything we're looking for to fill the lack is avoidant, or we hope it is. We hope that whatever we fill ourselves with gives us that sense of immortality, or that sense of, safety. And forever, like repetition of the cancerous, individualistic sort of avoidant state. And one thing that I've been, formlessness, the immortal formless, as I'm calling it, formlessness has always been important to me, because that's sort of the creative state where I apprehend creative ideas. But in terms of so in terms of the avoidance of death and how we end up trying to apprehend avoidance or fill that void, the apex, most ideal, or at least most often used, and I think for good linguistic or rhetorical reason, seems to be, I like calling them mascots, because I think it's a broader term, but we could just use the word meme. But so Lacan has this idea, again, not very in-depth on Lacan, but there's ideas that I pick up that I really like, that I like mess around with. But the idea of the synthome being this unanalyzable party, it may have been, and this is me, now I'm sort of tangentializing, but you take complexity and you compress it, similar to the compression distortion mechanism. you compress it with attention. The more attention something receives, the more sort of compressed this thing becomes. And it can be a compression of immense complexity. It can be socialism. It can be freedom. It can have immense complexity to it, but enough attention on it, and it sort of becomes this unanalyzable sort of synthomic meme. And because it becomes so flush, like an egg, and so unnuanced, you can, the exterior of it sort of calcifies and becomes this flush, sort of unanalyzable egg. And that egg, because it's unanalyzable, because it's achieved that unanalyzable state, you essentially have neg entropy in a single form. You have negative entropy, you have homeostasis, you have the avoidance of interpretation, you have the avoidance of confusion, you've taken a bunch of complex, confusing, unstable complexities and condensed them, compressed them into a meme. And that meme is immortalized because it's unanalyzable, because the meme no longer has distortion, because it no longer has plurality, and all that plurality, it still contains it, but it's been condensed into something unanalyzable. Now you can project your identity into it and immortalize yourself by projecting yourself into this sort of, mimetic state. And I guess that's where for me, I end up with the whole mimetic tribe, situation where, the things that we're really looking for out here that you're describing are things that can eventually combine or simply compress themselves into something we can throw our identity into, that ends up being essentially a conduit, or more like a what do I want to say, a vestibule, but like a
symbolic exchange system, symbolic currency.
It's a symbolic currency that compresses, that say, it's like a zip file. It's like zipping. You put it in and it zips your identity into it, and it will survive equilibrium. It will survive heat death. It will survive the universal death, and live into the emergent universe. Either because it can just do that, and I haven't figured out how the fuck that would work, but because, and then here we get, so I'm presenting sort of a total philosophy here, but if you zip these things, so these memes that are highly compressed, these zip files exist in this universe for the next emergent universe to harvest. So and here's where we get to platonic forms. And so those are what memes of any universe are, the forms that get to be harvested. And the reason they can be harvested is because they survived the universal equilibrium, heat death, whatever, because they compressed complexity into a eternalized state of unanalyzable, synthomicness.
And
enjoyment.
That's why Atlantis existed. And so
right, exactly. That's why dragons exist. That's why we know about these things, is because they were harvestable from these previous.
And the instinct to create a magical sigil, i.e. charge a symbol with a lot of attention that can serve as the mimetic placeholder, and the instinct to upload your mind in AI like Grimes does, she's so fucking cool, is the same. It's this, Owen sent me a link a while ago, or a little quote from the Dialectic of Enlightenment by Adorno and Horkheimer, where they spoke about this, there's two directions. One is to go towards nature, to strip ourselves from the clothes and the trappings of civilization and technology. And the other one, if I understand it correctly, Owen, please, you're going to explain it, is to go further into technology, to solve our problems through technology and capitalism and all of that. But to the point that the avoidance of nature is a natural force in itself. Mm-hmm. And so that sort of coming and going, to me, sounds very much like that dialectic Dugin speaks about, of the logos of Cybele and the logos of Apollo. Literally, there's no escape. You pray to matter, or you pray to platonic solids. That's the great membrane, right? That's the dual primeval dichotomy that maybe things seep from and into.
No, I think that's right. And you can end up bringing in, harvesting those platonic solids. I mean, we do it with fucking music all the time. At least, you know, the best songs I've ever written were ones where I stand back and like, who wrote that? What is that song? That already existed, and I did some hack job at mocking it up in this world, but there it is. You know, it previously existed. So I think we do drag, for instance, we're bringing back, let's say the dragon, right? Let's say the dragon is some sort of meme from a previous universe. We have accessed it. We've dragged it. We've dragged the dragon into, you know, Beowulf, and now it's in every fucking movie. And it yet doesn't exist materially. But of course, if our advancement continues, we will be able to recreate these things. Let's say that the total territory of our life ends up being in the ideological sphere, in the disembodied age, on the net, you know, post-human.
Maybe that's
well then dragons exist. You know what I mean? Because there we are. And so, you know, it's not that necessarily. I think everything. What's interesting about this emergent shit is that everything that was will be, and everything that will be was. And you end up with this amazing sort of Ouroboros, you know, because why not? What I like about that is essentially like an emergent evolutionary sort of universal, what would you call it? Universal emergence, universal evolution emergence, some shit. But it's this idea that, you know, this constantly emerging slew of universes has an evolutionary sort of like bent to it, where we're harvesting these things, iterating on them, and then continuing, or at least a continuance. And you know, progression, it's sort of irrelevant.
It reminds me, you know, in that article you wrote recently, I can't remember what it was called, but the one about New Age, where you were talking about like we are increasingly shifting from being bodies touched by ideologies to ideologies touched by bodies.
Yeah.
These thought forms just exist in the skies above us, which, by the way, is the way that the ancients lived. It's like there's the gods living in the sky, and then we just have to kind of pray to them, and every now and again they throw down the thunder or give us a good harvest if we're good fucking, I don't know, Romans. But point being is that these thought forms now live in the electromagnetism all around us all the time anyway, and we're just constantly plugging into them with our smartphones. I mean, they never really went away. What appeared to happen in the era of monotheism and then like enlightenment as just another step of monotheism without the theism is that there was a central coordination of the mimetic forces, of the thought forms, of the ideologies. And what the internet does again is it just fucking opens it up again. We're just right back in polytheism. We're way back in this, you know, Dugin calls his books Neuromachia, and his idea is that it's like the battle between these three divine forces, the Apollonian, the Dionysian, the Cybelian. I think it's like one step further than that. It's Neuromachia between a fucking infinite plethora of forces that are coming from all sorts of directions. And there's a kind of chaos to it. But then there's also, as Patrick Ryan, who we've spoken to on this podcast, points out, it's like we can't be naive and just think these are just the creations of like spontaneous creativity on something like 4chan. There will also, and probably are already, power agents beginning to interplay with the kind of mimetic environment, realizing that we can put out an idea, we can start to spread. It's the old conspiracy thinking, right? We can spread this idea about, I don't know, the Queen being a lizard. You know, maybe that comes from the CIA. Who knows? The CIA, the Kremlin, anyone can be putting out ideas. And as long as they've got some kind of synthomic enjoyment to them, they start to fucking play up in the human consciousness. And so we quickly end up in a point where we're being like, we are these ideologies living as like informational hosts upon bodies. And some of them are kind of running rampant through us, but there can be agencies. There might even be artificial intelligences, like artificial intelligences, bringing some up and pointing them out and then checking which memes work. Which meme works, you get all the data on it, and then you push that meme further. You can constantly refine and A/B test the different fucking memes and find out which produce the types of behavior stack that you're optimizing for.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's like the individual notion, right? Like we're all just these amalgams of data points. But I was thinking about that too, and apropos what you're saying, like I think what you're saying has been going on this whole time. If you just consider nature a player, or the universe, if the universe is an agent in the game, then this whole time we've all just been it has been figuring out what's been working, and we've been going with what's been working. And
of course, we are what it's working.
What's that?
We are that which is working. We are
that which is working, which is quite a statement, right? We are that which is working. Even when we're in this state of war, and you brought up something that I think was interesting, is like the state. So again, back to this question of, can anything other than dissolution, destruction, a war, destroy or re-permeate the membranes? Can we do it by sitting on our fucking armchairs? Can we do it by education, like a lot of people think? Or does it need to be destructive?
I put the question on the differently. Like,
yeah,
the flow exists on its own accord. The power of an individual to act still within that flow is commensurate to their ability to tap into the insights required to do so. Like literally occultism. Or my interpretation of it. Let me read to you something which I think is gonna, like, it drove me off the walls. I think it relates to this that we are discussing. So I found this meme on 4chan. I'm gonna read it out for you guys. Hegel was a sorcerer, and the left and right, being lobotomized bastard children of liberalism and conservatism, don't get this. He advocated for a supreme divine state, much like the Reich or the USSR's plans for Europe. And so you can take his insights and use them to justify extreme statism of some kind, or some kind of techno-socialist autarky. Right Hegelians focus on his dealings with the spirit. Leftists focus mostly on the dialectic itself and try to secularize that as some type of silent pneumatic machinery that drives history towards class conflict and communist statism.
Yeah.
Insane. And Hegel's phenomenology is a form of mimetic psychoactive agent that binds the memes and the minds of everyone who reads it. It is venom, pure necrotizing linguistic magic.
Wait, sorry, what's he saying is venom? The left's interpretation or both interpretations?
They're both insane. And his phenomenology is the form of mimetic psychoactive agent that binds our minds. That's the venom. That's the pure necrotizing linguistic magic. He was a genius for this reason. And also, if you're not an autistic retard, he basically shows you how the techno-alchemical engineers of civilization, I think conspiracy theories are perfectly healthy, are transforming humanity into a sacrificial killing field for otherworldly forces. But that's not interesting to rightists or leftists because they're castrati golem creatures who only exist to poke holes in the barrier between man's conscious rational awareness and his subconscious chthonic realm. If you wait long enough, Hegel's name will come up in most discussions by these groups. He's the root of all their lunacy. We're going to be harvested.
Right, we're going to be harvested by our own advancements, possibly, and or sure, like an external force. I think, yeah. I mean, I think that what's interesting when I start to get excited about, external force war, is when I think about the globe cephalizing, and then as a brain, we fight other brains. I think that would be fun. You know what I mean? Like, that's a war that I'd be interested in seeing.
Neopolitic or neomachia, the war in the noosphere of what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, on ontological on the design, and this is something that I keep coming back to, there's this essential twist of terms of how I interpret things, which is, it's not that we are the ones having these ideas. Like, what if they had us from the beginning? It was these ideas that
Okay, so give me, I'll bite. So who's they?
The idea, well, it's not within the realm of the human. It doesn't fit within our brains to actually understand what that they means. Rather, it's up to us to just live according to it. We were thrown into this world. We don't know if it's a simulation. If you lift some curtain, there's a fucking hole out.
Sure. But what if the they is just a force? Does that comply with
the void?
Or maybe, right, avoidance of the void. I mean, yeah, because I think that there's, I mean, that's my theory on social, like, it's why social behavior is entirely governed. Everything is governed, and it's all governed by, society is governed by social anxiety, not law. We've been governed by social anxiety from the very beginning. Yeah, we have laws to reify and reinforce, but the tacit laws of status anxiety, because everyone balks when I say social anxiety, because it makes them think of, like, I don't know, being in a fucking psychologist's, like, couch. But the reality is that we all suffer from status anxiety. And it's not just, capitalist status anxiety, but straight up old school tribal status anxiety. Will I be on the out? Will I be excommunicated? Will I have to shiver and die in the cold? Well, how am I going to survive without a tribe, without all that? And the same cascade of fucking adrenaline floods through our fucking flesh when someone makes fun of us at a fucking market, as it would when an actual tribe excommunicated us in the middle of the winter into some Siberian landscape. It's the same cascade of hormones and fear. We are so guided by I really do think that the sort of invisible hand is, that creates the Adam Smithian sort of cooperation from mutual self-interest, or even Lacan's the other. It's anxiety, and it's anxiety that stems from intersubjectivity. And so maybe there's something about just relating that is the universal force that makes us even engage. Like, has anyone questioned, why do we even have dialectics? Why are we confronting one another? Why are there oppositional forces to begin with? Perhaps it's literally a compulsion of differential elements, that so long as there are differential elements, they're competing, they're afraid of dying. And so one tries to take the other. That's the way that the universe seems to work out in the end. There's some sort of, oscillation between avoidance and permeation. And that sort of, it's like cancer, life, death, yeah. Like that oscillation seems to be avoidance, permeation.
Totally. It's, we were talking about war earlier, and I was thinking when we were talking about that, the Deleuzian point would be like, basically there is only war. There is just different gradations of war because there's just different forces coming into contact with each other. And that doesn't mean we just glorify all sorts of war and turns into one of those Italian 20th century dudes who are just like, we need to just embrace war. Yes, exactly. The futurists. But there is a sense in which the act of being a subject itself is an act of war upon itself. It's like once upon a time we're babies and we cry and we shit until mom or dad comes along and says, no, you can't do that. And there's some kind of conditional requirement on that. It's like, you cannot just be a blind servant to your drive to piss and shit. You have to restrain that. You have to do essentially an act of violence upon your own drives in order to take your place in our intersubjective network. And we do that without even really like thinking of it. That's just our adaptation. So we learn repression, and then moving through society is like, power is essentially repression. Power is the line that cuts off and says, no, not this. So it's an act of violence committed upon a drive. And our identities are basically constellated around this fact. This is the Freudian point, right? That we are these absurd amalgamations of contradictory drives. And in order to have some kind of social relationship where you're not going to be kicked out of the tribe, but also that you can enter into desiring relationships with the other people in the tribe, you need to have a certain form of internal repression that's somewhat effective. And essentially having a working subjectivity means that repression works. That war upon yourself is fought to a standard that there is a kind of fragile peace.
And I would add to that personal sovereignty, the much sought after sort of crown jewel of personal advancement, is simply a declaration of victory over self. It's
a total lie for that reason.
And it's a total lie, but it speaks to, it is the language of war. I try and tell people this all the time. Sovereignty is the rhetoric of war. And of course, yes, this is all speaks to a gradation of subject object interrelativity. And the more, and so this division between avoidance and permeation is not binary. Obviously, it's a gradation, and you end up, and we've all experienced this probably. I certainly have, like feeling like, oh, I want to be sort of hermetically sealed off from society, to something in between, to entirely embraced, and then back. And so there's a gradation there. Yeah, but I just wanted to hit that note that for all you personal sovereignty lovers out there who love talking about personal sovereignty, just know that you're committing an act of war upon your own senses to tame them so that you can fit into any given context, so that you won't necessarily offend, so that you can create more comportment. Now, that might be a great thing tribally, especially intra-tribally, right? And intertribally. I think it's cool to experiment with peace and understand, but you have to, not at the expense of the understanding that you are suppressing something. And the idea that the things you are suppressing are pure aberrations that shouldn't be there to begin with is incredibly presumptuous.
I feel like I'm either going to
precisely, and this is why the whole thing come up recently around Daniel. Let me talk for a second. The whole thing about. I'm going to say this is why the philosophical work around Tantra and Sutra, I think, is so fucking important, that our friends like Alexander and Hamilrick and Sweeney are throwing up. That like this to me is the way of thinking this deadlock. It's like subjectivity is essentially repression, prohibition to a large
shit, you broke up.
And however, looks like my connection's fucking frozen.
Yeah,
repeat the whole point, please.
You're still frozen for me, but maybe I can hear you.
Still frozen for me as well. Maybe he should be repeating this last point.
Yeah.
Owen, are you safe?
He's been gobbled up by the
egregores have taken it up.
Yeah.
Oh, you're back.
Fuck's sake. Fucking.
Oh, hold on. While you recalibrate, I'm just gonna go get something to drink. 1 second.
No worries. We can edit this out. Dude, nice. Like, here's what I'm gonna say. Violence and repression are the tools of creativity. It is that which can invoke the intelligence of the materials in the same way that to make a chair, you have to cut into the wood. In that sense, maybe war is the universal, but I'm willing to be de-radicalized on that subject because indeed I am very much into personal sovereignty, but like to the point, like it deserves to be questioned. Let's save the juice for later.
Yeah.
All right.
You back?
I'm back. Hopefully. I'm ready for your master work.
Hopefully this internet, it's being fucking temperamental, so hopefully it can kill me right here. Yeah, so this thing about Tantra and Sutra, like the basic idea is that Sutra is the repression. It is creating the stable social identity based upon a certain act of victory over your drives, a certain degree of personal sovereignty.
Can I ask you, can I just interject and ask you, is it because Sutra is practice, right?
Well, so Sutra, it's like renunciation is probably the closest Western word. So it's like you renounce.
So then it's actually bluntly, sure, it's bluntly sort of suppression. Okay,
and it's what, like most of the meditations and the type of spirituality that's popular in the West is this sense of like, you hear people saying, I was really angry, but I know with the moment, then it's just like, it's actually just the moment. And so the underlying statement is I don't need to be angry.
Sure.
Because really it's just what I'm doing is I'm like misconstructing the present and having an emotional reaction to it. So what you're trying to do is renounce a particular response to the present so that you still feel in control. Then the idea of the tantric space is to create a sacred space, which is not what exists in everyday life. It can't be, because if that was everyday life, it would just be chaos. But a space where all of the stuff that is not allowed in the like respectable social identity has a place to come out. So where the anger, where the pain, where the sexual perversion, where the things that might have been ritualized once upon a time, like we had a conversation on the internet about like ritualizing the scapegoat mechanism. I see that as being like a tantric thing to do, to go into a space where you live action role play kicking someone out of the tribe and murdering them, in a sense. To actually
exactly.
really all have that within you as your social possibility.
Okay. So that's Tantra. So Tantra is sort of event distortion, but controlled event, controlled distortion.
Precisely. And it's an act of distortion and also kind of act of war, because what you're doing is it's another kind of act of war, but the war is actually the war upon the stable identity that existed. Like there's the identity of repression, which is the sovereignty, the sovereign identity. And I think the Tantra is the kind of unleashing the forces that the sovereign identity thinks it has conquered upon itself, so as to grow itself and grow a greater appreciation of what itself is and what its potentialities are. And the idea like that comes, if you like read Chogyam Trungpa, the Tibetan Buddhist teacher, he's like every emotion that like has a positive correlation. So for example, anger, they talk of doing a kind of alchemy where you transmute anger into clarity. And there is a kind of clarity to being angry. When you're angry, it's like, I'm going to do this. There's no fucking deliberation. It's just this happens. And building practices out of the things that we would prefer to renounce in our normal personal lives.
So the relationship between Tantra and Sutra, could I view it as Tantra is Sutra's apologist and Tantra is what sort of allows the Sutra to continue or to be bearable in a sense? Or is it more pure, like more of a pure, non-instrumental, intrinsic relationship?
I think Tantra does it is there to make Sutra bearable, but at the same time, what I hear the guy saying is like Tantra isn't for everybody, and not everybody will want to go into the tantric space. Like a lot of people might want to just preserve a somewhat neurotic identity, to have a kind of stable self of desire and have certain things. Like I'm a nice married guy with a stable job and I have fantasies about sucking off men in the pub toilet at the weekend, but I'm never going to go and do it.
You know, it's so interesting, man. So again, this comes back to distortion, compression. To me, Sutra is compression. Tantra is the distortion. So it seems like they actually have something pretty good worked out, especially because, you know, it's a controlled game. So that's ontological design, Sutra Tantra, right? Because it's like, this is the punishments. You're accounting for distortion and you're ensuring dynamism. So you're creating a pluralistic container, which is basically the concept of something that you know, feels like life. You know, it's got stresses, it's got you know, relaxed points. Yeah, I mean, you know, the other thing I just want to bring up that's an interesting, just aside, to whatever extent, is all of this stuff also, distortion, compression, Sutra, Tantra, they also relate to redundancy and I guess dynamism, or redundancy and novelty. So whereas Sutra is sort of like a repetition of behavior. Or even you can even do it with anger. It doesn't have to be suppression. It's like, I'm going to be angry all the time. And you create that high salience where there is no dynamism. Or you allow an event or, you know, a novelty to occur. So anyway, it's just interesting to think of it also, Sutra, in terms of repetition, and Tantra in terms of, you know, a novelty or you know, an aberration, which is also interesting just in terms of, you know, the ultimate repetition is a straight line. And that's also representative of equilibrium, which is also representative of death. And so these distortions of the equilibrium actually constitute life itself. So you really need them, you know. Um, and I guess what I'm sort of interested in is what's the maximal distortive capacity something can have before it starts becoming homogeneous distortion, and to try and live in that maximal eventological way.
I think
Yeah.
I think to answer like that last question very directly, in my view, nature itself does not allow for, or nature is a very big word here, but reality itself does not lend itself to. It's not like that's gonna happen, at least within the scale of our lifetimes.
What's not going to happen?
The fall back into the straight line, or the
Oh,
fact
I
that
see. Sure, sure, sure.
mm,
You
again,
mean socially or physically or everything?
I think everything, the nature of reality is not one
Okay,
of
sure. The nature of
going
reality.
towards stability. It just goes towards some stability, but then there's a lot of motion and tantric reorganization of its own accord
Sure.
happening. Like,
What
here's
about universal economic equilibrium? Like what about heat death? What about the end of this universe? Does that constitute a straight line?
I think though that's an to be very like basic in answering that, from the perspective of my reality, how it appears to me right now, and for humans, how it appears, that just doesn't seem like a plausible possibility. That's an
I feel
abstract
you.
we're conceiving at the end of history.
Sure, sure, sure.
But like if we live in the day to day, the way that we perceive reality is not one of tending towards that heat death. Uh,
Well,
things
I guess the reason I guess here's a valid reason why I'm asking you. Because if we don't believe in a heat death, if we don't believe in death, then what the fuck are we afraid of death for? What would we be afraid of? I guess it'd be loss of identity and just reformation. But like there's a project I want to that I've been trying to pitch. I've been pitching around. It's have you ever seen that movie Flatliners? It's about these guys. It's a '90s movie. It's pretty fun. We should do it like that'd be the dorkiest thing we could possibly do.
watch it in comment.
Like a sit movie night with everybody.
Oh, bro, someone's already working on it. It's coming.
Really?
Yeah.
Awesome. Where we all are watching in our own rooms and like talking with this. That would be fun. Eating popcorn. That would be fun. Anyway, so okay, total dork shit. But anyway, so in Flatliners, they're a bunch of young doctors and they kill themselves for a period of time and then they'll bring themselves back to life and they go to the other side.
That's Alex Jones.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really fun. Cool. But I was thinking about trying to start a real one, like a real Flatliners Club, like a real organization. And I found out that there's like a head of a hospital, ex-head of a hospital, who wants to do exactly that. Just needs funding. So if anyone's watching this and you want to, join up, but I think that one of the main purposes of it would be to give people a sense, if it turns out that I mean these near-death experiences or post-death, re-death experiences are incredible and they're real, and I don't doubt them for a second because I've communicated. Here I'm gonna say something I've never said on in the public. I've communicated with people who have passed on. I have. It's happened to me. I'm not going to deny it. It should become something that everybody understands is possible. Now, as a rationalist, I don't necessarily need to incorporate that into my analysis of things, but it is an experience I had. And, if everyone can experience something like an apropos, if we could watch and really comprehend the death, that the void, that the immortal formless doesn't necessarily, it's a gradient. It isn't a binary of erasure. It's like, you may enter it and who knows what the fuck's going to happen. It's just a continuance. It's a gradient. But if everyone understood these things, how less, could we re-permeate our membranes? Could we let go of extractive behavior? Like at heart, I'm actually a progressive. I'm curious about the idea of progress. I'm curious what that means. I'm also curious, incidentally, that are we addicted to oppressions? Are we addicted to progress? Which means, of course, we'd be addicted to finding oppressions against which to progress, which makes me a little nervous, but still I'm a progressive and I'd like to see, um, what it would be like to re-permeate all of our membranes and get back to a sort of non-cancerous, non-capitalistic, non-individualistic state of permeation. Yeah.
Fuck yeah, man. Fuck yeah. Listen, the history of how, first of all, I'm 300% with you on that. The history of society might be analyzed or named as the history of cults progressively improving upon their adaptations on reality. The current cult, based on the myth of no myth around scientism and all of that, is based on this sort of permissive humanist priesthood, which is very enabling of
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
it's very enabling of a lot of capitalist schemes happening through and through, which, like you said, they keep us addicted to oppression. And in one sense, we're all guilty of this shit because if you on one hand have that, if we all have that instinct towards progress, there's also this addiction to the pain of it, which is kind of the reverse tantra and sutra, right? It's kind of, you have tantra, you have sutra, and you have like the anti-tantra and the anti-sutra, which you also enjoy perversely, the darkness of it. The alchemy with which we create realities, which will in turn engage in competition. Your sentence, which I'm quoting you in the book that I'm writing, you mentioned it's not really about a competition for reality, but realities in competition. Fuck me, that's king. That's genius. And precisely because, in my view, the alchemy with which we will be able to create these realities optimally, to design these cults optimally, meme plexus to navigate the noosphere optimally. And by optimally, I mean in the way that you design them for whatever fucking purpose you design, is tremendous. And as we've been seeing in this conversation as well, at the core of each of these cults, there needs to be a lack of void. And this last very cool idea that you just mentioned, which is, death tourism, of going into death and coming back, is just something that, Alex Jones mentioned on the Rogan podcast.
Sure.
He's a creative theory artist, in my view, Alex Jones, or an oracle, however you want to call it. He's one of the priesthood. Why? Because when he goes into these rambles, he did mention that the Rothschilds, they take off their hearts and they go and die and they go up there and communicate with the machine elves and come back down. And I'm listening to this and I'm like, yes, more, not less, not more ethics, not more care, not more, let's take it easy, not to radicalize people. No, we're double, triple down, because the few, for the many, because for the many, please, let's keep it. For the few, is like, dude, deeper. Anything less is dithering while Rome burns. And so saying that, when you say this thing about trying out death, would I try it? The fact that I have doubts about it proves that it's such a good insight. But I would say that those death practices are such richly pathically charged practices that they do have the power and potential required to generate belief. If you scale it, productize it, belief at scale. In other words, those are all ontological design, those death practices, the alchemy of creating reality. Those are all the ingredients that one needs to create a perfect ontological insurrection in the world, the ontological atomic bomb, really, to make belief the subject matter of creativity at scale with AI. It's not just about crafting belief with your hands, searching for the intelligence of the wood when you're crafting it by hand, right? The wood, a while ago we mentioned the intelligence of wood. We were discussing intelligences. But I want to mention the fact that, violence and repression are in a way the tools of creativity. Wood, you have to cut into it. And if you apply modern digital artificial methods to it, then I think that what can happen is you can scale the fuck out of that reality production technique schemata, and you can create very powerful things. In other words, if you take a person, if you make them go almost through death and you bring them back, and then you tantra and sutra, in other words, if you reward and punish the fuck out of them, maybe you have an algorithm behind it, bro, you invent the reality you want.
So you reward the exploration, you punish the demure, right? Is that what you're saying?
Depends on
like so you're encouraging people to have the tantric experience and bring it back, or what when you say reward and punish?
Depends on what you want. Depends on the cult that you're designing. If you're
okay, sure,
an Islamist,
I guess that would be the cult I would be designing. I'd be rewarding, because that's always the question. Is like, people talk about like how to create a game B as opposed to the game Theoretic. And dude, you can't do it without incorporating death. This is basically what I want people to understand. Like, you can't just create the game B. You can't just be like, oh, let's change our minds. Let's unpermeate the fucking hermetically sealed safety barrier that we all have against the void. You can't just do that at scale, as you said, because
unless you do it,
because it's too big, because it's almost like a fundamental law of nature. Once a membrane calcifies, it doesn't just matter. There is no fucking magic. There's magic. There's not magic. It's magic. It's nature. And once something calcifies, something needs to uncalcify it. Something needs to permeate it. And yes, thought is one thing, but it needs to alchemize. And so it needs some kind of, coeval force. And I just want people to understand that, like, we need to reincorporate the death initiation. We need to reincorporate the permeation key, the super clarity of formlessness. We need to accept it, reintegrate it, and then we can start to move.
Completely.
We need to get beyond this enlightenment framing. This has come up already, but I've been reading Dialectic of Enlightenment, and the basic kind of thesis is that the Enlightenment postures itself as a way of breaking out of man's arbitrary enslavement to nature. We're going to get rid of all of these like old forces, the old gods, the old rule of kings over us. And we're going to do that with pure instrumental reason and bureaucracy, essentially. And then this process of reason and bureaucracy is a way of setting free, but it can only do that by negating everything that isn't the process of reason and bureaucracy. And in the end, anything that isn't just an increasing efficiency of bureaucracy, technology, rationality seems like an arbitrary value that comes from without, that needs to be bred and systematized out of the system. And so essentially what gets selected for is a system, and its only fucking drive is to increase itself and its own efficiency. It's kind of like the Enlightenment is basically accelerationism by default. And I think this is precisely because it denies that void, it denies that gap, and it posits that we have to become free by getting rid of our slavery, but it just becomes another drive that we're totally enslaved to.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, I don't think the problem is, if it would be really nice if we could go, okay, we just need to stop trying to be free. We can use to accept our slavery. But the problem is to act, to think, to create is only done because of a fantasy of freedom. You get up and do something because you want to be free of whatever the present is and have some kind of different chain of possibilities open in the future. So we're constantly caught between this thing of trying to be free and then having to become enslaved to become free.
Right. Which is the progressive nutshell.
Listen, very quickly, there's the mad psychology of fascism. But this, Owen, is the mad psychology of liberalism, democracy.
Yeah,
and
it's progressivism. It's the idea that, and it's what, I always tell people, I became a heroin addict on purpose. I had to manufacture hardship. I knew it back then. I remember making a choice at age 19. Should I become like a Buddhist or should I become a heroin addict? Those were my choices. And I was listening to an Alan Watts tape, and I'm driving through the valley. And I remember I'm 19 and I had done heroin a few times, and I was like, oh, I know what this is. This is, I actually honestly think I did know what it was. It was an unconscious death initiation. But I knew it. I was semi-conscious of it. It was a death initiation. Our society lacks so much this, committance with the void, that it was like, okay, I can become a heroin addict or I can become a Buddhist. Either way, I'm sort of confronting the thing. And I decided to become a heroin addict, but it had the double advantage of generating hardship for me. For an upper middle class kid, I knew that I was missing. Like, I had jobs for no reason. Like when I was a teenager, I'd go get my first job was at a place called Coffees and Suntans to Go. And I'm 16 years old, and my job is to sop up all of the sweat from people who had just taken suntans, like fake suntans. And it's this grotesque operation where there's this combination of sweat and coconut oil, and it's just dripped off their balls and ass, and then you're just sopping it up, and it's all over your hands, and you have to spray it and wash it all down. I did that for no reason but to exist, to manufacture a little hardship for myself because of that progressive compulsion to the oppression, to experience what it's like to really live, in quotations, right? But Owen, I will come. I want to push back on one thing.
Yeah.
And that is that I do think it's possible. I do think it's possible to have a genuine expression of creativity, and forget the word freedom, but that is purely conduited, that is born of a pure conduit. And it's not necessarily I think the fantasy is that it's my creation. That's the fantasy. But if you can get to the state of flow, we see it, we feel it. We feel something is rushing through us. We've been taken over. And you can call that anti-freedom. Freedom really is neither here nor there. What it is a sort of godhood, that it's not it's not yours. As soon as you think it's yours, you close it up, you're done. It's like the king that, yeah.
I totally agree. Adorno has this thing where he says, like, conscious man needs music because music is his only way of actually experiencing the drives of nature once he's distanced himself and alienated himself from nature. And I love that way of saying it. But that's the paradox of being in the truly creative act, is that in some sense, you do let go of your subjectivity, your sense
which is a death, right? To let go of your subjectivity is a death.
And the whole Enlightenment process. Art. The Enlightenment has to relegate art to entertainment, and that gets realized in its mass form in the 20th century because we can't really have a place to transcend.
And by the way, just to like put a cap on your Enlightenment speech, which I thought was brilliant. This is stupid. This is a stupid observation, but it's interesting, at least as a fucking story. So yes, we have the printing press and we have the Protestant Revolution, 1517 or whatever it is. But in 1600, that's not really the Enlightenment, as far as I'm concerned. In 1600, we have Galileo, Copernicus. They actually measure it, and there's no more geocentricity, right? Everything is solar centric now. We've lost the center of the universe. We've lost our homocentricity.
Event.
27 years later, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. The cogito is born. Is that a coincidence that suddenly we're no longer the center of the universe? So we decide to become the center of existence, the creators of existence. And I honestly think that the entire fucking Enlightenment, which is basically the supersizing enchantment of the self. It's the enchantment of the self, because even, I'll come back to it, but basically, I'll come back. There's a word I'm trying to think of, but anyway, basic point being that just after we lose our geocentricity, we bring up homocentricity. We bring up anthropocentricity. We become the center of existence, and I can't help but interpret that as a response. It is. And which basically means that the entire fucking Enlightenment including now I'm going to have to use the word, but it's escaping me. It starts with an E, and it's about um, uh, grasping knowledge from your senses. It's it's a version of epistemology. What's that?
Empiricism.
Empiricism. So empiricism, the basic premise for so much of what we know, is all based on the concept of subjectivity and senses. We lost objectivity as soon as we found out we weren't the center of of God's attention. We developed a theory where we're the center of all knowledge. Fuck you. And I honestly think it's worth a look because it kicked something off that ended up with capitalism. Capitalism's not an emergent property of previous economies. Capitalism is an emergent property of the enchantment of self.
I love it.
And when we begin to understand all this in this framework, and maybe even as a response to losing our centricity, everything starts to sort of make sense to me.
The enchantment of self, and at the same time, the disenchantment of the world, the enchantment of the individual as the absolute and replacement of God, and the creation of the Great Barrier, as per Bruno Latour, I think, which is this idea that the whole world is not enchanted anymore. It is supposed there's a barrier. There's a barrier's reason. It's
okay.
Another layer of avoidance.
So maybe one of our big solutions, and this is a total, I've never thought this before because I've been almost perennially against this. But now, and I've heard you guys, I know you guys are, I intimate that you guys are kind of for this. So I'm making a step in your direction.
I'm going to agree before you say it because
okay. But if the world losing its magic, if externality losing its enchantment means that we have to turn our enchantment and sort of keep it here, which then would explain New Ageism, of course.
Don't make me cry, brother. Yes.
Obviously, one of the potential solutions is to re-enchant the external. Because by doing that, you create a necessity, you necessarily create permeation by way of differentiation. Because there's enchantment out here and enchantment in here, and suddenly this is a transitory space between me, the enchantment of me, and the enchantment of the world. And maybe that can, and of course, this is the argument of all religioneers. And I get it. We've lost our myth. We need to come back to some myth. But until this moment, I didn't necessarily have a real strong fundamental reason for coming back to myth. It always felt like institutional romance. But now I think I actually can grasp a sense of the reason for it.
But listen, the thing is, in my view, very quickly, when you go into myth and you accept it as this sort of new epistemological grounding, this field for valuation, animism, when you go into...
don't get into panpsychism. Are we going to start?
But the thing is, it forces you to reconsider so many things. And listen, time is it, right? We need new myth. We need a new thing. Yeah, bitch, but you have to let go of everything else, literally, like time. So the illusion, for example, that it's 2021 today, is it? Like, hasn't time gone non-linear the moment we decided to go fucking animist? And we, as first person of view inhabitants of this game, aren't we required to navigate this field? Isn't animism the ability to create wormholes? Isn't animism to speak to the person who wrote something technologically in the year whatever in the past and have them here present today? Phenomenologically, the answer is yes. So what happens to rules of engaging with reality when before and after get so fucked and revamped the way they are when you accept this? And I think that that's sexy. That's extremely exciting, because then all of a sudden lines of flight in the Deleuzian sense, right? The ability to break up the individual, tribe, society, city, world, all of these oppressive institutions which continually Oedipalize us. Here's what we've wished, which is the ability to just break them off at will. Here's a cloud where every point can be your next step, where every point is the center simultaneously. There's no more bitching against the center. There's no more, it's like a free field for reinvention. And there, the only thing you can actually focus on is turning inwards, fetching that inner Promethean fire, create, like Daddy Deleuze says, and then dot. And that's where you want to be. You want to be at the edge of the new world. You want to be at the edge of that dot of where do we go from the point where reality becomes animistic? Because my bet is that it will. That when AI becomes hegemonic, when it knows more about everything and everyone than obviously human knowledge, which it kind of already does, when it becomes like utterly absolutely hegemonic squared, then animism, then we're walking in a dream, then it's really about like you're a tribe, you're in a camping trip for the totality of your life with your friends, 70 plus people, and there's a priest who fucking leads the way. Then that's where you're at. That's where we are. And I honestly bring it, because to actually make sense of that in that way is like, you know, I was born in 1991. I remember being like 12 and being like, shit, nothing happens in 2004. Nothing happens. It's like the 60s and the 70s and all the fun is over. All we have now is Muse, for fuck's sake. And now I'm thinking, no, good that we're born now, because it means that we can perhaps jump into this new step that is more than we could ever have bargained for. I think we must have all made a mistake in the antechamber for being incarnate. We must have made a mistake, or we must have been like the oldest of them all. We're no, I'm going to be born there.
Yeah.
And it's a gift.
Yeah. Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, there's so much there.
Where did I go? Yeah, I kind of rambled. Sorry about that.
No. I like all that. I feel like
animism, and the thing is, like when you
well,
try to
just
a little bit into it, you go.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden,
animism thing is like, you know, so it's interesting because animism, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, and you may have a different view of animism, but animism cannot help but beget panpsychism. Am I wrong?
Yeah, ish. I'd say so. Like from the point of view that,
I mean, I think so.
Yeah, like every thought that you have has a meaning, that everything is charged with meaning, that everything is an entity, a meaning is alive.
And this is like, so this is the only point, like I almost, like the people that are pan-proto-psychism, let's call it. So, okay, so Bard and other folks, but I was just watching something from Alexander today.
Like it, right?
They go, you know, this idea that, first of all, that a component has to be a component is already a presupposition. It's fairly erroneous. We contain multitudes, so do they. So does the most base component, right? So the idea that like, so everything's made of this thing. No, motherfucker. It's all made of substance. Like, call it whatever you want. Call it Bajugala. It doesn't really matter what you call it. It's all made of something. It's all made of something. It doesn't matter what name it has. That's so yesterday to me. Like it doesn't matter the name. Like the super clarity, when I'm in the fucking permeation, there is the name. It's not that. I know you. That's all it is. Oh, I know you. And once we experience that substance, or once we just say, okay, let's say that there's a substance that is mutable. Let's just say that substance is what we're talking about at large.
Okay.
Well, then, if substance is what we're talking about, finally we can talk about gradation. Finally, we can talk about gradient. And once we can talk about that, we have to admit pan-proto-psychism, period, end of story. That's the end of the conversation. Because, and it's not that consciousness is at the top of that gradient. It's not about top, bottom. There may be something beyond consciousness, meta-consciousness. I have no idea. It's irrelevant. It's that whatever this substance is capable of whatever it produces. That's what it's about.
I totally agree, man. I think the only thing about the panpsychist stance and perhaps why it's criticized is like, because psyche is what we experience as the highest element of our being, we then project that onto the substance and then say, so it is psychic, because that's the highest potentiality we can see. And so panpsychism has a kind of element of Cartesian like anthropomorphization. That's my only issue.
Sure. And otherwise, but you got to recognize it's only that definition, ironically, if you're in an anthropocentric state of mind.
Yes. So let me just very quickly jump in, very quickly. Manuel de Landa has this book about the war in the age of intelligent machines, where he speaks about the machinic phylum. He says that machines descend from each other, that there's an intelligence to materials. If I'm a woodworker, there's only so many things you can make with wood. You can't very easily make strings made out of wood because that bend. No, they don't bend. Wood doesn't bend. If you make a little toothpick, you bend it and it breaks. So the intelligence of the material presupposes what can be done with it. To me, that's intelligence with a big I, meaning the intelligence of the processes, not the intelligence.
Let me interject. Not just the intelligence of the process. Dude, you hit on something that's this is an old theory. This is maybe my first theory. But I got to bring it back at some point. Intelligence, I sent this to Cadell recently, actually. I don't know if he'll dig it at all, but to me, all right. If I'm looking, I love that you keep using wood. So if I'm looking at a tree and I glean any piece of information off of that tree, there is an interaction that has just occurred. If I'm able to extract information or get information from something, an action has just occurred. It's not a static object and an observation. In order for me to pull the information into my field, an action has occurred. And that means that active information, I don't have any problem calling that intelligence. Now, consciousness is another issue, but the idea that things, as soon as intersubjectivity is present and things are interrelating, which they always fucking are, then you have active information and you can give that whatever name you want. But I can give it, I don't think intelligence is far off. So I think that active information, the idea that it's all intelligent is not a radical idea.
If I had to make a bet, there's not really any limit between consciousness as such, the one that we espouse as human beings, and the consciousness of human beings exists within the same spectrum as the intelligence of materials, which is at the other end of the same spectrum, namely that they are perhaps different intensities of
they're communicating different things, but those different intensities are communicating.
The thing is that very quickly, when humans entered into this social relationship, it's no longer a matter of it kind of entered into a feedback loop that kind of got exponential, namely that the ability of us as humans in our neurological makeup to become a material, to interact with the world, and for the world to do its work on us as if it was God on wood, i.e. Jesus was a carpenter.
Or fucking sandpaper, right?
You take a little bit of it out of it. It hurts, right? It's not supposed to be hurts. Violent suppression, that's my point a while ago, but I'll give you that. But I think it's kind of the same gradient of the same thing as other materials, right? That's why when you put your finger in the air and you try to listen to your dreams, they sometimes make sense. Even though they're not really conscious, they're unconscious. But shit, they're the material, they're the subject materiality of reality. We can listen to them. Experiences of awe, of flow, of excitement, all of these experiences that we have. What the fuck do they mean, right? Sometimes I think that they're kind of the grain of the wood of our reality, giving us a couple of tips.
Sure. Yeah, and hitting sweet spots. Sure. And I think that, just that. What's that?
Leading us, because any good carpenter
leading us.
Wood leads the hand, not the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the whole ontological flow state. Like, and in terms of design,
you do it.
Whatever. I'm just riffing here, so I'm going off topic again. But I'm bringing us back to just friction and the wood analogy being obviously a refinement in most cases. And so, of course, that produces both a progressive and almost possibly sociopathic. It's funny how progressivism and sociopathy are almost the same thing, because if the progressive truly believes that everything, that better things can always emerge from worse things, then everything is good. Then everything is fair game. But I guess my point being that God damn it, I lost my point. Oh well. I have to pee really badly, but you know what? I'm in luck. Maybe you haven't had anyone take a piss on your show yet, on camera. But I think you're in luck here.
I think you deserve it. We can make a break. I'll bring it, bro. We'll edit it.
I just tried to go, but there's someone having a shower, so it's.
Yeah, no, just keep it recording.
What was the? So I was talking about the tree. I was talking about friction, and then
progressivism.
Progressivism. That's where I got lost. I think I was just referring to the friction of.
Every once in a while, I can start to say things, and I start to make my accent sound a little bit not so rude.
Yeah, yes, there you go.
It's good when you go on one of your deep, fucking heroic rambles and you bring out the Jose Mourinho a little bit. And it's like a call to arms. I fucking love it.
It's a tactic. Jose Mourinho is a good coach for football. I don't know if you know that, Alex, but he has been a coach in England for 10 more years. Like, he's spoken English all his life. He's good at it. But when he's Jose Mourinho.
Oh, okay.
But when he speaks in front of a camera and all that, he will start to speak with an accent like this, and he says what.
Right. It's brilliant. Yeah.
He can say like outrageous shit, because his whole persona is really about being like this really bold guy who says the things how they are and like really outrageous shit. But people he doesn't know how to speak English better, so you kind of have to forgive him for his grammar and how bold his things sound, which it's completely tactical.
Yeah, that's cool.
This
is really fun, man. This is one of the most fun conversations I've had ever, because of because most podcasts, you could use it for promo probably. Most podcasts, there's a certain degree of status anxiety, like what I was talking about before, the invisible hand, because you have these implicit, tacit agreements. You're this podcast. Okay, well, let me like do this, and let me do this, and then we're going to talk like this, and you're going to give this introduction, and then I'm going to give this presentation, and we're going to do this to sustain your brand, which is essentially redundancy, which is repetition, which is the premise of society. So this idea of like repeating successes and improving upon them is part of the tacit makeup of what fucking steers us. And and when you talk about steering, it's like, and machines. One of the most interesting machines would be the machine that doesn't steer you. What about that machine? What about What about creating a weird cesspool of freedom in reality, where people actually, not Burning Man's, that's an attempt, for sure, for sure. But things go tacit, rules go tacit so quick. So for instance, if you have, who's the most disruptive force at a Burning Man? Decompression, right? It's a guy in a suit. Suddenly the mean, the average, is the disruptor. That's no good either.
Is there anything philosophically?
What's that?
If you ask the question philosophically, is there anything that does not do it? Like, is there anything else
that does not
incarnation, intemporality?
So is there anything that does not create redundancy? Is that another way of saying? Okay.
Yeah.
See, for that, I think we need ontological design because the nature of interrelativity. So there's something I'm working on that I'm only just started, but it's as opposed to cognitive dissonance. It's called cognitive harmonics, and it's the idea of holding two seemingly contradictory aspects within your field of understanding at the same time. So I'm going to live and I die, or whatever it is. I'm conservative and I'm liberal. Whatever it is, that person is this and that. And just starting very simply, and it's a deck of cards. And the only way you can move from one card to the other is, and this is where it gets kind of woo-woo, but you have to trust yourself. So have you guys ever done somatic therapy by any chance? Like, it's very basic. So what's great about it is your body is the therapist. So for instance, let's say I'm the therapist and you're my patient. I'd say, welcome. How are you feeling? Take a breath. And you'd breathe and it'd be like, do you notice anything in your body? And be like, I feel tense in my neck. Okay, breathe into your neck. You're like, what? So you're like, okay, yeah, breathe into your neck. So you breathe into your neck, whatever the fuck that means, but it means something. And you breathe into your neck. And they're like, let me know if anything comes up. And you take your time and you breathe into your neck. And all of a sudden you're like, I'm having this weird memory. I was 3 years old.
Oh, dude.
And I'm in the park. So your body tenses, like stresses, distortion in your body, create these focus points that communicate to you memories and communicate to you maybe even snags in your sort of ecosphere. And good Lord, why was I bringing that up? I have no idea. But anyway, somatic therapy. Yeah. Okay.
Go on.
Yeah. So the stresses of all that and the somatic therapy, bringing the stresses, revealing, basically the stresses end up being these sort of like stages, right? And people always talk about this, like Donald Trump is a stage, right? He's not a light worker like the New Agers thing, but he is a sage. He was a canary in some kind of coal mine. He was a message, right? He was a distortion. He was an event. Obviously.
Yesterday evening, I was trying to fall asleep and I was having all of these like moments when you're just about to fall asleep and you start remembering dreams that you had one night in fucking September when you were 16 and a half or some shit, weird associations. And then the question is begged, namely, you have these memories and sometimes my mind is like, oh, it's just a memory. It's nothing. But then, is it really nothing? What does it mean for it to be remembered now? What does it mean for me to be having this experience now? That's what I've asked myself whenever I've been having flow states or extreme states of awe and gratitude and sacredness and all that shit. Namely, if I'm given to experience this, what does it mean? Well, it must mean one of like two things at least. One is I'm kind of like pushing it because like, I want to feel it. So you kind of press the button a little bit more. So you kind of go through that neurological route, that libidinal riverbed. You kind of like it and you want to traverse it more. So you do it. And then on the other hand, there's chance, namely that you don't know what you're going to get out of it. It's like pressing a slot machine and you don't know from your neurologic, from your nervous system, and from all the inputs that your body has and your memory has. You don't know what memory you're going to pick up, but the fact that you pick up a memory is meaningful.
So one thing to just build on this that's interesting that I realized. Where did I write it? I have like my little notes hanging around.
I fucking love that you have that, man.
That's something else I should bring up later. But basically, where is it? All right, I'll just remind me what you were saying just now.
I was just saying that sometimes the ability to invoke certain images, certain ideas.
Memory. So, all right, so interesting fact. Immortality is not necessarily, it can be a measurement of time, sure, but like whatever. Immortality is more a measure of dissolution of form. So if we go to a ontological design that wants to account for and create event distortion, right? That's its point, is to create event, like to create, to be an invention like an invention store, right? It manufactures invention. And if you want to get an invention, you come in here, fucks you up, and you come out with an invention, right? You come out with something like event, something that disrupts the equilibrium that exists outside. So if you want that, and you're thinking about memory, one way is to create, is for instance, instead of a compression or a limiting on the song or the society, instead of compression, it keeps things in, keeps the peaks non-distorted, and keeps some of the valleys.
Here's another way of thinking about it. I used to be an architect, so it's kind of like urban planning. You're planning the roads. It's road work.
Sure. You're planning the roads. You're planning the communication. You're planning, societally speaking, you're planning the inventionality. You're planning the creativity of a species. You're planning the creativity of a people. And creativity is about these moments, right? And so you're either compressing them so they don't distort. So you have Jesus and it distorted. Oh my God. So we compress that. And now the rest of it is process. But process is almost like an anti-pejorative because of the nature of society. So instead, it should really be called compression, because process implies something almost regal. And it's not necessarily regal. What it really is compression after an event. You know, so distortion, compression.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. So anyway, so moving on from the compression thing to memory. Let me see if I can fucking remember this train of thought. Speaking of memory. So memory being okay. So one way to create immortality or to create event, this is interesting. I don't know what it means, but one way to create event is to create non-redundancy across a bracket of memory, I realized. Now, at first, I just think you create non-redundancy, and that creates event. But what if you include subjectivity? Then all of a sudden, you have to include memory. Now, memory will bracket the area that you're creating events within. Now, if you have a goldfish, and the goldfish is the memory, the poor goldfish who doesn't actually have a 7-second memory, but we pretend it does. And the goldfish has a 7-second memory. Well, all you need to do is create a pattern that is unique across 7 seconds. And then you can repeat. What if you have no memory? Then literally any movement is new. Homeostasis and equilibrium is new.
Is memory a function of the ability to write things down?
I don't know, but I think memory has a really interesting relationship with event and distortion. So if there is no memory, everything is event. And I think what
so which is unbearable.
Yeah, right. But what if we created a pool, a ontological design that is permeable, that people can enter in at the risk of their own neck, and all it was pure event, loss, which you can either achieve by loss of total memory, in which case everything is an event, and so you're experiencing event, or you create it by actually keeping your memory and making them experientialize different experiences as themselves. Either way, it works.
Sadly, the first one seems to be more plausible than the second one, but I would be willing to fucking explore both creatively, because hell yeah, thank you for framing such a question, for bringing it into the world. Secondly, that seems like, you know, what if I had a cult, if I had the ability, you have $1 billion, make a cult, I'd be like, okay, let's fucking brainwash people. Namely, let us remove memory, namely, so every single moment is new. That's kind of what, dude, the American experiment.
Well, not really.
West, the amount of cults you guys have, the relationship you have with truth, the ability of
okay, sure. The relationship with truth.
I love it. I'm American, but like, there's a certain level of
well, look, this is just to take your pause. This is again the argument for accelerationism, because in America, at least, right? Because how do we really do create our truth every fucking minute. We are in this weird state of creator. And if that's where we are, at least in my flowchart, you have no way out except for acceleration and dissolution of that, unless, and that's why I keep coming back to this, unless there's something else that creates permeation. And I just don't know if there is necessarily, but anyway, maybe that's a conversation for a different, or maybe that's something that we'll just never know until it happens. But
yeah. This is a question that you've like brought up since the beginning of the conversation. It's really cool. Like, honestly, it's like deep. It's not like it feels like a research question, something that you need to hack at for longer, because I don't feel like I'm able to provide a satisfactory answer quickly.
Yeah, no, it seems like something that, it honestly seems like something we'd have to do, but I honestly think it's worth it, because if we could understand that, to what extent is permeation available to non-disintegrate, non-avoidant states, or to avoidant states, without the context of war, without the context of, and war not as war as either you or Owen described it, war as the total gradation of war, from subjectivism to, differential elements.
Battling forces.
Yeah.
On every level. I mean, look, my take on we're talking about here, it's like memory, I think it's on some level essential for just creating enough of a stable sense of self so that the species is able to reproduce itself, basically.
Okay, but hold on. Okay, cool. Let's talk about this. Why do we need to...
Degree of compression is necessary.
Okay, but why? So the first part of your sentence was about creating enough of a sense of self, right? Are you there still? Oh shit.
Owen is frozen.
Sorry, I lost Owen.
Go on.
Okay, so the idea of creating enough of a sense of self,
yeah,
so that you may what? So that you may fucking what? What is it? What is it that we accomplish with self? And I think that's worth looking at. At least that's something I know that a lot of people other than me have looked at that, because I'm such a fucking socialist. So I need to really look at that. What is it that we create with self that's so fucking precious that we are not willing to experience God because of it, that we are not willing to experience permeation, to experience the void because of it. And, you know, a lot of people point to differentiation, like not to lose, but individuation, Jung, right? And this idea of Jung's differentiation, individuation, which is the idea that we all share this collective unconscious, and part of the individuation process is approaching and sort of the way, this is the way my imagination sort of takes it, appropriation, but also delimiting of this is my shadow. Of all the shadow, this is mine. And this is me now. And in that delimiting or delimitation of self is still a obeyance to self. So what happens if we take self away? Because it still feels like a charade. So once we take self away and we apply the Jungian ideal of, you know, individuating, but suddenly now we have the whole pool of selves. We have a whole pool. Then suddenly it's not about, okay, this is who I am, and this is the shadow I have to deal with, but this is the shadow we have to deal with, you know? And I don't know, for whatever reason, for me, that's more interesting. You know, maybe it's because I'm infected with progressivism, or maybe it's because it's a more interesting problem fundamentally, because honestly, if we're only trying to solve the shadow world for ourselves, well, then each single siloed shadow world can have its own rules and is sort of trivial. Like figuring that out is trivial. It's like purely, I want to say adaptative, but just personal.
Oh, dude. Like, honestly, sometimes when one gets, and by one, I mean people of our temperament, when they have an extra bit of drink, get
Yeah.
one in the conversation, right? What it feels to me, it feels like you're actually just wrestling with the fucking nakedness of it all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. I'll just say yes and then continue.
Yeah, no, because it's like, you know, you put your hands in your face and you look at them and it's like, no shit, I have 5 fingers.
Right.
What, you know, it just feels so random, so extreme. The concept of thrownness comes to
So
mind.
random, so extreme, and so repeated. It's like this.
There's a structure and
all of this is redundancy. So when I'm looking at my hand, that is literally redundancy that is creating any kind of coherence. Coherence depends on redundancy. So I like saying that because I like the idea of challenging people who are so into coherence. I like the idea of challenging people who are so into, you know what I'm saying? Because all this is, all sense making is redundancy.
I know.
It's like, swing the axe, brother.
I love it. Because listen, God, I lost my train of thought. But the idea
No, let's stay in this. I'm glad you lost your train of thought, because if we're in this tunnel of where redundancy is, let's just pretend. First of all, yes, okay, redundancy is order. We get it. Okay, now we're putting that aside. Let's talk about redundancy in the context of creativity and what we're born with the capacity to do. We're born with the capacity to like follow rules, but guess what else we were born with? Like clearly on some other echelon of capacity is the capacity to create. And the capacity to create is not like really even responded to this capacity to suppress and this capacity to homogenize. The capacity to create is some sort of inversion. Now, it may be that in the meta, we actually are not agents that are free, and that what we're in fact inventing is forms, platonic forms, like we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, that we're extracting and harvesting from the previous worlds. Sure.
Yeah,
sure. Maybe, right? But what is our capacity? What turns us on, right? And so this conversation is so fun, for instance, because probably no one is going to understand what we're saying.
No one ever does, don't worry.
Except for a few people.
Well, they
But
do.
like,
They do.
we should honestly have these conversations once a week. It would literally, it would help me so much as a human if we just like,
I'm down, man.
You know what I mean? Like, okay. Like for real though, because okay, so when I was a kid, my mom showed me this story, and she's like, "Hey, you started this band, Edward Sharpe. It has a lot of people in it. Let me show you the first story that I ever saved from you." And in my mind, it's the first story I ever wrote. This is the first one my mom ever saved, and it literally starts: "Once there was a boy who had a crew." That's the first sentence. And I was 6 years old. Crew? What the fuck? Like, I'm talking about this fetishization of crew. Why? Because I'm denied it. I already knew at age 6 that communion was nothing more than a compression of behavior. That event was disallowed. When I was 5 years old, I got, so I got put in therapy at age 3. My parents were sort of well off, or my mom was well off. So she was able to put me in this like private kindergarten. And in kindergarten, I did something, I don't know what it was, and I had to get put in therapy. Then in preschool, they brought a jungle gym full of tires to the school, and they lined us all up and they said, "Okay, we have a new jungle gym. Before you use it, we need to explain to you the rules." And they started to embark on this sort of rulage. And I got up and I faced the audience, which was my preschool class, just like the teachers did. And I interrupted them. I said, "No, no, no. This is how you climb it." And I turned around and I started climbing this tire jungle gym. There was a bunch of tires connected by chains. I got sent to the principal's office. My mom came in again. "We'll send him to therapy. Just let him stay." So from age 3 to 17, I was in therapy so that my mom could keep me in the private school she wanted me to be in, right? And then I quit around age 19. And I'll just bring this to like what we're talking about now. The somatic therapy that I've been, and it's part of what my dad was involved in. My dad, this is an interesting story just for the hell of it, person issue, but my dad was a therapist. He was they called it a psychodrama. And that's what I would hear up in the fucking, so he had his practice was above the garage, and he tried to, seal it with audio insulation. But downstairs, we would hear everyone screaming. And he had these batakas, these fake pillow swords, and he would have his clients hit him. And he would be like, "I'm your father. What do you want to tell me? I'm your father. What do you want to tell me?" And they'd be like, "Fuck you! Fuck you!" And I would hear this down in the living room. I'd hear people screaming, "Fuck you!" And I'd hear this. And then my dad would come down crazy, fuming, mad, having absorbed all of their fucking neuroses. And he didn't have any other therapist for him to take it out on, so he'd take it out on me. So when I started doing this somatic therapy, which was about the body being the therapist, and where you start to be like, breathe and you think about where the tension is and breathe into that, and you have a collective, you have your own experience, your own memory, and you breathe through that. the idea of being able to do that for a collective, and I want to bring this up because I know both of you are going to be against this. Pendular, everything we're talking about has not yet included something that we deal with day to day, which is pendular overcorrection. Everything we deal with today, so for instance, the reification, and this is a new thought, but the reification of the membranes of both individuals and tribes is ongoing. It's ongoing. I think actually of its own inertness, it can move back into a state of non-avoidance. But if it continues to reify, it stays in a state of avoidance. So that's like my new sort of theory. But if we continue to reify, it stays in a state of avoidance.
Maybe.
And go ahead.
Yeah, maybe. Go on.
Yeah. Okay. So
because when you reify something, it kind of becomes avoidant, becomes averse to the void.
Well, yeah, when you concretize almost anything, that's why I don't like giving anything a name, because the implicit repetition. Sorry, can you remind me of where I was at before I
There's a point that we weren't going to agree with.
Sorry? Oh, there's a point you're not going to agree with. Right. Okay. Which is?
If we name it, we kill it.
The point you're not going to agree with. Oh, God.
If we name the... But if we name it...
This was important, and hopefully you can cut this out, but there's a point you're not going to agree with because you have expressed things on that fucking list. Fuck. I'd have to rewind and watch. I can't remember at the moment.
Okay. I think this is a very beautiful organic moment to keep in because...
Yeah. Respond to it because maybe I'll remember what it is. Oh, sorry. I was the jungle gym
event.
So it's an event. So I'm on the jungle gym. I get kicked out. Now I'm in therapy. Now my dad is doing therapy. He has these takas, but he comes down and he is completely rife with fear, and having eaten all of his clients' fear. So he comes down having consumed all of this, and he comes down and him and I get into arguments. And now please interrupt me because I've lost my train of thought for sure.
Okay, how did we get there? So we're talking psychodrama. We're talking about you being in therapy when you were young. We're talking about compression. We're talking about community. Community came up as a big thing. You were talking about the thing about you and crew. You read that book and there was something about having a crew.
Yeah.
I'm glad we were talking about the issue with sense making. Sense making is just being compression, and then an alternative to that comes from those of us who are a bit more artistically inclined, where there's an inclination towards the event, towards the moment of nonsense rather than the production.
That's for sure. All of that.
Sense.
Yeah.
And then,
yeah. I wish I could figure out where that story was going, but alas, I got to a drunk. But you know what's interesting? So I'm just going to riff for a second. So this is for people who have been watching, who are like, what the fuck are they talking about? And whoever you are, if you've actually made it this far, wow. And let me just say that if you've made it this far, this in and of itself, in some ways, is a permeation key for you, is a super clarity for you. And you've impressed me. Because
seen.
Yeah, you are seen, right? Because
you are with us.
What
there are not many of us, but the few that there are.
No, there's none of us. And even those of us that exist, if you were to send me, if both of you, for instance, were to send me your predicament, and you were to send it to me, what would be my natural response? Oh, let me try and fix this. Let me try and help them fix this. Let me be helpful. And in and of itself, that fixing, sure, it's generative. We end up, moving up the scale of emergences. But what we're going to end up doing is falling back down. And if you can hold both of those in your mind at once, the idea that failure is an imminent part of success, that we need to have war, that we need to have these debates, that we need woke to have anti-woke, that we need this to have that there is an interrelation of dependency that doesn't necessarily apologize for the atrocities committed therein. Like, it's not like slavery was a good thing so that Black people could understand what it's like to be oppressed. That would be insane. That would be insane. That would be Kanye West, who said that 400 years of slavery sounds like a choice. That would be New Ageism. But instead, to understand how difficult that was and how deep we needed to go. Not as some bullshit, unnecessary choice that was born of, cognition, but rather some entirely necessary emergence vector that entirely required that oppression to emerge that much more strong or that much more whatever. You know what I mean?
Aquinas says that, or in the last that we had a recent podcast with J.P. Marceau, a Christian guy from Canada, a really exciting guy, and he mentioned that Thomas Aquinas mentioned, and this is, I'm quoting twice, that God acts by necessity and by circumstance, namely that through the vicissitudes of history, through the ups and downs of circumstances, all the tumbling against the wall or the luck or lack thereof, that's also God speaking. That have we gone far enough? Have we gone deep enough? Are we good enough to stop yet? Or are we in need of going triple down, like quadruple down? Are we done yet? Have we learned everything?
That's the big, I think our own internal guidance systems know that no, we haven't. And I think that's why we keep going. I think our own internal guidance systems know that no, we have not gone far enough. And so we keep going. And so the idea, and I think that this is why I've always been against the idea of equilibrium and the idea of homeostasis, is that we're not there yet. We're just not there yet until we have no more there to go. Until we have no.
I don't think there is there to go. It's just the movement, man. It's just the waves of the ocean. Just the waves of the ocean, forever and ever. It's just the new moments. Like, I don't know. We can think about music, right? You can learn your scales. You can learn your fucking harmonies, and you can learn that. And presumably, there comes a point where you've learned all that is technically possible upon an instrument, apparently. But that doesn't mean that the actual creative expression with the possibilities is ever in any way limited. And so that's what all the little possibilities, the learning of scales, the learning your languages, that's like creating a compression so that when you step beyond compression, you have a better ability to articulate. And that, again, is the dialectical relationship between compression and distortion, is that if you've got no compression, then you're just like a 3-year-old playing a violin. It sounds fucking horrible. What you need is the compression, which is the study. But then the issue is that like most people never get beyond compression, and you end up with in fact that's
You
kind of
end
the
up with total
enlightenment.
fucking compression.
Become
Yeah.
incredibly technical, powerful. It's like people who go to music college forever and ever and ever and learn how to play all of these mad concertos, and they play it with absolutely no passion at all because they've got no sense of going beyond.
I agree, and I think that just rhetorically, because I know I have a feeling that the next Bard book is going to be sort of monumental. This compression, this compression issue. And I think that if you replace event with distortion with compression, distortion with event and compression with process, you end up really pointing people at the it's not that it's a problem at scale. It's a problem at time. And so if we end up with compression at scale, we end up with homogeneity. We end up with, it's not that pluralism is like moralistic. It's that pluralism, the appearance of pluralism, signifies adventure, signifies the presence of adventure, and signifies innovation. This signifies dynamism. And so process, honestly, to me, I don't know why I'm going directly at Bard right now, but process to me signifies, it co-signs the action. And I think this is something we need to be aware of rhetorically. Like, we need to be aware of the rhetorical implications of our designation, so that process, which has a rhetorically positive implication, so that event and process are rhetorically almost equivalent. In a society where we are process dominated, that's the wrong approach. If equilibrium, if true equilibrium is of concern. So I don't know. I think it's a debate worth having, but I do think that process, as opposed to compression, that we view things as compression, as suppression, as what they fucking are, as what they are. They are raw suppression, period. End of story. That's it. That's what they are. It's fucking blind as day. Why call it anything else? And furthermore, that suppression governs event, and that relationship, is implicit. And I still think that that's at the center of what we're dealing with sociologically,
Yeah. So there's the conceptual distinction between compression and process.
I mean, I just mean rhetorically. I just mean rhetorically. Like, when we talk about, let me think of something that switched polarities. Let's think about it in the negative: freedom and freedom. So freedom, and freedom meaning sort of like, this almost atomistic freedom versus states' rights. So versus racism and the institutionalization of privileged rights. Both are rhetorically called, let's say, freedom or states' rights, freedom, let's say, and patriotism. And so, because rhetoric, via Lacan, via fucking everybody, honestly, interpretation, rhetoric, has plays such a large, outsized part in reality creation, that protecting those who are not necessarily under the obvious infringement of compression. So those who have been deemed outside of the issue, or the true outsiders, when compression doesn't affect a specific person, they become those people who've been negated, to use a word that I do think, who have been negated, become the only agents of change, because otherwise everything is going to end up in redundancy. And so then you end up with the Deleuzian sort of premise, which is short-sighted, because of course the system actually needs newness. So instead of the Deleuzian solution, which is to create sort of orthogonal or whatever, what's the word, asymmetrical problematics, you reincorporate again, the permeation piece. So that is the idea that everything is sort of disintegratable. And, and just to end, because I'm definitely rambling and definitely stoned and definitely drunk, but it's been a definitely interesting conversation, is that the membranage between permeation, self-tribe, self-permeation, in and of itself avails itself to fundamentally everywhere non-identity. So anywhere you have trans as opposed to conservatism, which is why in the end, woke is going to have this immense internal battle between trans and race, because race is going to quantify the conservative aspect, the arbitrarily conservative aspect.
Right. Now listen, this is interesting. This is not clear cut for me as well. I would say that the ability for change, in the broad sense of the term, to come about, is not contingent on the belongingness to an underclass, especially when in capitalism that status of belonging becomes a commodity.
So hold on, the belonging of the underclass is not dependent on what?
It becomes a commodity in capitalism.
The belonging of the underclass becomes a commodity, of course, because of the factor of cool.
Yeah, you do it because it's cool. It's your clothes, it's your style, it's your way of talking. So in other words,
so this is probably, so my book, which is spiraled out of control, was initially just called Kingdom Cool. And what you're referring to is what I see fundamentally as the most intensely convoluted aspect of this problematic, because cool ironically requires both disintermediation and disinterrelation. So the individual becomes indivisible, cannot be aggregated nor ingressed by the collective. So when this is now a famous fucking TED Talk, but before that TED Talk, I actually came up with this funny sort of joke, which is, what's a guy in the corner at a party, that's not being paid attention to by anybody. He's uncool, right? He's he's alone. What's the guy who's at a party, who's in the corner, who's not paying attention to anybody, who has a cigarette? He's a loner. There's a big difference between the loner and the alone. And the difference is that the loner intentionalizes their lacuna, concretizes their membrane. They are at war with the tribe. They have a teleology. They have a purpose, right? And
Yeah.
that is the real attraction in a lot of ways of the individual, the bootstrapped individual, the capitalist individual, the selfishness is a virtue, or Ayn Randian individual.
What about the other coolness? What about the coolness? Because you're correct, but what about the other coolness of being? Yeah, people hate me.
Yeah. So that's a good one. So that's under uniqueness. So there's no real way to like I don't necessarily have my like single sentence approach, but in a sentence, Steve Jobs's Apple's think different. Imagine if think different was the catchphrase of, you know, Medici Incorporated.
Right.
No fucking way. They would fund different thinkers like Michelangelo, but they would never advertise to everybody to think different. That would be insane, because that would homogenize and depluralize the peaks and valleys of this arrangement. Everybody as unique, by the way, is a homeostatic state. Everybody as themselves is a homeostatic state. When you have pure event, it's the total compression of society. You know what I mean? Anyway, I have to take another piss, so I'm going to do it while on camera. And if you guys want to cut it out, you can. But I think I figured something out, which is kind of fun. So maybe I could even conduct like marathon sessions and pee during it and be served food.
Pee ahead. We will be here.
All right, here you are. So I'm peeing right now. So if you have anything, throw at me.
We're on the winning formula here, man.
What did you just say? Was that some Norse shit?
You kind of broke up, Owen, and I think he's kind of
probably my Wi-Fi.
Yeah, your Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi, as always.
Is the
I'm too broke to afford a place in an area with decent Wi-Fi, so I have to start with this 19th century.
Oh, Owen, are you in Ireland?
I'm in London.
Oh, okay.
That said, I it's so funny how like, oh yeah, in Ireland, oh no, London, they're supposed to have good Wi-Fi. Anyway, go ahead, take a piss. We'll make a break when we're back.
I did it.
You already did it? Oh, because you're.
I peed and I was in front of you, and it was amazing.
Alexander Ebert, what are you drinking?
Okay, so the only thing that I can drink without getting sick is agave, and this is a very honestly, I know it's George Clooney, but this is a very good agave varietal of agave. Just blue agave. This is Casamigos, but I have my own.
Where'd you get it? In Tulum?
No. Where'd you get it in Tulum? That was good. No, I got it in New Orleans. Because I drink way too much. So this is so I have a mezcal company called Neta, and it's honestly, so speaking of, it's like you have event and you have the compression, which is the norm, and then you have suddenly these distortions, and they distort your fucking reality field. You taste a mezcal, and it is the best fucking mezcal you've ever tasted. How did this happen? What anomaly? What fucking cascade of events?
Oh, my friend.
Manifested this moment for me. And so you have this.
We are led by this cascade of events. It leads us. It is not us who leads them. Listen, bear in mind, agriculture was not an invention of humans. As we invented it, so did the market, the empire, the war machine get invented, right?
Okay, so let's actually, that's interesting. I don't know if any of us have the epistemology to be able to break this down. But can we just pretend to pick apart the transition from agrarian
Oh yeah.
to industrial, because and it's all, by the way, I should state, it's only worth picking this apart if we agree, and I'm not even sure I agree yet, I have to think about it, but if we agree that the transition to enchanted selfism, I'm not, if the transition to extraction occurred because of like as a cousin of that, I'm not sure how else to phrase it.
Can I very quickly jump on that? Very
Yeah.
quickly. I think that the transition to agricultural society kind of dawned on people like the monolith on 2001. In other words, it came up on us, and it was such a development. In other words, it understood us so well that we had no other choice than to chase
Sure,
the
sure.
threats that it set forth for us. Namely,
Sure.
yo, you want to fuck more? You want to get like more kids? Get agriculture, because you'll get food.
Okay. So I agree. So can we, just for my own edification, because I haven't thought enough about this. How did that
Edification.
how did that change? How did we make that
Making
transition?
buildings.
What?
Making buildings, edification. Is that what you mean?
I mean,
Wait, what was the look?
Urbanization. Because the thing is, like agriculture,
okay, so
surplus grain.
okay, so let's just say it could be any of the things you just mentioned. I just want to make sure we're in confluence around the idea that what in terms of emergent vectors, what created let's just say what created society and its discontent, civilization and its discontent. So let's use Freud's words. What created civilization and its discontent?
The war that needed to be waged upon subjectivity, or rather upon self, in order to create subjectivity.
All right. Well, hold on. Was that you, Owen? Because you're not even showing up. Is that you?
Okay,
I heard you.
Here. The fucking internet's killing me by now.
Okay, so Owen said it's the war on subjectivity. Am I wrong? That created
It's the war of self.
The war of self, which I translate into
the war upon self that produces subjectivity.
No. Okay, hold on. So let's just clarify this. The war upon self, in my book, would actually be scientism, or okay, hold on.
That's his latest manifestation.
But what?
Okay, maybe that's an improvised way of saying it's the way that nature acts upon itself to consciously repress itself, to consciously compress itself, so as to happen to time. That is what allows civilization. Civilization is a complex pattern repeated over time.
Sure.
How is a complex pattern like how compression get achieved? By nature finding out a way to wage a particular war upon itself that allows a particular pattern to repeat. So anything that goes beyond the compression threshold is instantly back down.
God damn it, I'm losing too much of you. But I feel like what you're saying is really great.
Owen, I think you're breaking up like massively. So if you don't mind, I'm actually recording. So I'm going to jump in very quickly.
Yeah, go.
Yeah.
Do you want to jump in, Ebert, yourself first?
Okay.
Kind of lost my fucking thread.
Yeah, no, I feel you. This is this is funny shit. Okay.
I fucking love this podcast because it's one of the first ones that we properly had. I feel
you. We're really doing. We're kind of doing an event, and it may fail. That's the best part of events, by the way. If we could just like state it, like being willing to fail, the event does not care about failure. Right. And as soon as we don't care about failure, we grasp the permeation key and we can return. So anyway, we can always return. So anyway, look, this I guess for me, what it comes down to is identity versus assimilation. That's all. That's all this is. That's all this is identity, one identity or another, how good they are, what they are, or a instantiation or a internalization of an identity. So if it's interminable, that means suddenly that it's become a symptom. So it's what we talked about at the beginning. It's so often repeated. The personality or whatever it is so often repeated that you can place your identity inside of it and it will exist therefore as a symptom to be harvested by future fucking universes. Or it is, go ahead.
And hunger machines.
And hunger machines. Yeah.
Hunger machines.
Yeah. And so you have this sort of
endless, nameless.
It's very endless. and yet what the nameless part is sort of this this permeation key. And so I think what I'd like to think is part of every one of the conversations we've had today is the nomad, the nomad. So let's pretend it's Bard's nomadology, but which is too heavily dependent on Deleuze's nomadology, which is too heavily dependent on cool. Cool is unstable. Cool is bullshit. Cool is entirely predictable. The valley is uncool, so therefore it's going to become cool. Whatever is uncool will become cool. We understand this as the asymmetry of war. And so once we understand that, we put that aside. And we think about permeation. And we think about imitation. And we think about, though, most importantly, just to come back to permeation. Okay, so we have permeation as the ideal. And we have cool as this lacuna that is impermeable. You know, we have we have fucking, what's his name? Oh my God. Okay, kind of blue. What's the name? Miles Davis. So we have the Miles Davis lacuna. And it's patented Miles Davis. It's the Miles Davis lacuna. And it shows up. It shows up as a meme. It shows up as whatever it is. It shows up in such a way that it becomes a mascot for what it is. And this is where I'm going to bring in. I'm going to bring in mascotism. So we have the meme, but when the meme is famous, it becomes a mascot. And the mascot represents, in its external form, the totality of the ideas it's purported to represent. Yes. But in reality, the mascot only represents its superficial exterior. And what it is in reality is a repository for identity.
Okay,
so dude. So people may project their identity into the mascot.
It is functional.
Yeah.
It is a functional apparatus. It's a technology for doing that, for the purveyance of identity and its sort of sub-vectors.
Yeah.
It's something supposed to provide that. You design it as such. If you design it well, it's not just a fucking sigil. You design it taking into account what it means when you go to sleep, what it means for you when you're likely taking breakfast, what it means when you're taking lunch, what it means when you're watching movies.
Well, here's what's interesting, Daniel. What's interesting is that everything you're saying is true, but it's only true insofar as someone like you decides to add a topological vector on top of the topology that is natural to the situation. So for instance, let's say it's, you know, like just to be really blasé, let's say it's X curve. And X curve is what represents this topology. But you, Daniel, have added a layer on top of it because you've identified with X curve. And so when X curve happens, it triggers a sort of proxy demonstration where there's a proxy demonstration inside your topography that mimics the topography of the fundamental level. And therefore, you get to sort of create not just a simulacrum, which is sort of totally controlled to the fucking apparatus of destruction and creation, but rather a new eminent life form. And that life form gets to sort of exist as a self-preservational creature at scale. So it gets to multiply, it gets to perform all of the same adjunct features of a single, you know, the atom.
Bacteriological.
Go ahead.
Yeah. It gets to perform all the same features as a single-celled organism. Bacteriologically. Yeah. In other words, I would completely agree with you if you would say that entity is like an egregore, is like a massive macrobe, not a microbe, a massive macrobe. We are, as humans, unable to kind of get in touch with by way of our own cognitive makeup. But however, because it exists in higher dimensions, higher spaces, and higher times, we can only understand it as creatives, as priests, as understanders and threaders of synchronicity.
Yeah. And that synchronicity is always going to be inherently asynchronous with some other aspect of dominance.
Synchrony is the nature of this world. This world is death. This world is asynchrony. This world is avoidance.
Well, but also, and it would be really interesting to.
Only God is perfect.
It would be really perfect. It would be really interesting to explore whether or not mathematically asynchronicity was God, essentially, was equilibrium. So, for instance, you know, and I can't speak on it mathematically, but experientially, if this experience plus its equivalent somehow negated itself and equaled God. And I think that concept of negation, of homeostasis, of equilibrium, again, is death. And I think that whatever society incorporates that emanation, that correspondence with death, ends up proliferating itself. And of course, it's fucking obviously homeostatic, but of course, it's obviously, you know, non-integrational. It's obviously, what would be the small version of that? Not homeostatic, but anyway, but afraid of the norm. And
there's part of brother. There's perhaps, and by the way, let me just introduce this properly. We are perhaps on our way to ending this little beautiful experiment of a podcast.
Yeah.
By way of ending, I want to mention that yes, there's two vectors as far as I see it. One wants to go further ahead, deeply, like pedal to the metal, and go deep into the technological dark night and ask what the fuck is happening, like face on. And the other part is really like we know we cannot. There's these complicated driving vectors which we may be extrapolating and trying
Well,
to make.
look, I mean, I think that what you're saying brings us back to I think in some ways the thrust is the thrust of at least emergence.
Right.
And that is death. And that is however you want to fucking interpret it. And that is that however you want to interpret it, it plays an integral part in the emergence of preceding vectors. And so even if you decide that death is your latent last vector, the entirety of vectors that lead up to it must amalgamate to death. And because of that,
They do.
yeah, and they do. And it's like the easiest argument, right? And it's the most fun. And so when they do, we get to argue for all kinds of shit that precedingly felt presumptuous. Like, for instance, like, look, Bard has a great argument on anti, proto, proto fucking like plural theism, whatever the fuck. But the problem is that once we all arrive at certain experiences, once we all arrive, which is an experience of life. Look, when we all arrive, I'm sure we've all experienced this, even if it's just as musicians. The idea of arriving at a certain level and then seeing someone else arrive at that certain level, that's not sort of that's not ambiguous. There's a differentiation, there's a scope that you have a sense of, that even if you disambiguated sort of political, I don't even know what I call it, but differential.
Right.
Even if you've experienced that, you still sort of have reverence for these incumbent experiences that are like, hey, I just experienced this. And if you don't, then what you're doing is compressing. And, I'm just not interested in compressing. So when we talk about all of the stuff we've talked about today and the fact that I've been slightly drunk for some of it. And so you're like, okay, what was lost? What was lost today? What was lost from our conversation to excitement? Let's say excitement is a vector of reality. Excitement, the world of excitement. What did we lose today to excitement?
Everything. I get like I will bet.
And then that becomes its own reality.
No, sorry.
What's that?
I will give
go ahead.
Everything that I am. What do you want?
Right. Sure. Right. But a lot of people won't, and I think that's what's interesting. That's where sort of where did I write it? To bring it back a little bit, that's where Sutra and Tantra differentiate. So what do you want? You're an explorer, right? Both you and Owen are explorers. That's why you even have this site. That's why you're trying to do anything. You are explorers. And when you experience Sutra, that's Tantra. And when you experience Sutra, that will satiate you. That will create the genomic, the identifiable vectors for you. But and within that you can create controlled distortion. But If you want real distortion, if you want real distortion of your thing, you have to entirely sacrifice, for instance, technosocial. The very concept has to be, riskable. And once it's riskable, then all of a sudden we have the ability in the moment for the rare fools who are in the same vector, because that's important too, to be able to comprehend what it might be like to have, non-social, technosocial.
What do you mean?
Well, I guess what I mean is, like, how does technosocial embrace death? How do you, as a brand, because you're and now I'm going to be an asshole for a second. Okay, technosocial, right? You have this recurrent brand. You have this brand that is entirely dependent on not only recursion, but redundancy. Technosocial. When have you repeated that in your previous post? You fucking lame tard. You understand? Where's the event, motherfucker? Where's the event? And because of that challenge, it's like, can we convey both at once? Can we invite and can we convey? Can we invite and convey at the same time? And can we repeat the successes? Because success is so integrally tied with the repetition of redundancy. So we repeat Christ's, exploits here so that you can read them over and over, so that you can redundant size them. And then can we have some other eventology over here that can then repeat? So can eventology be a repetition? Can distortion be something that we continually incorporate in order to, instead of compress them, limit them? And limit is the most beneficent phrase that we could possibly learn to this process. I've done a post, one of my most viral posts, second, fourth most viral post, whatever it is about the shrug emoji. And that the shrug emoji is much more, much more important and integral to the growing of self than is the prayer emoji, than is the high 5 emoji, high 10. But rather that the shrug emoji, the I don't fucking know, that the wisdom could possibly be paramount to the knowing. That wisdom and knowing may not actually have the exact same epistemic framework that they derive themselves from, but rather that not knowing itself is an integral part of this stage of knowing, of the stage of being that incorporates everything. And, this sense of knowing, which is so integral to the individual, to the tribe, that has very clear delimitations. To even people that I know and the groups that they belong to, when the delimitations are so clear, it's very obviously to me implicative of a underlying presupposition that is erroneous. So for instance, you might have, some kind of intermediate phase of selfishness, and you may call that cancer, and you have the body has this sort of like intricate phase of non-selfishness, and then you have selfishness, and then above that you may have spirit, and the selfishness is plaguing The selfishness is plaguing the body. It's eradicating the moments of vicissitude, of difference. And so you consider this strange order, this strangeness, this aberration. You consider that cancer, and then you treat it, and you get rid of it.
Alex, we won't be able to sort this today, but I want to say that today's